Okay, so today we're going to deep dive into Atomic Habits by James Clear.
All right. Sounds good.
And, I think it's interesting that he starts the book with this really intense story about how
Yeah.
he got hit in the face with a baseball bat when he was in high school,
Oh, wow.
like a really bad injury, broken nose, skull fractures, shattered eye sockets.
Oh, my
He
God.
had seizures. He had to be like airlifted to a bigger hospital.
Wow.
And then, like, a year later, he gets cut from the varsity baseball team.
Oh, no.
So, like, that whole journey of, like, rebuilding himself piece by piece,
Right.
that's kind of like the backdrop for the whole book.
Yeah, it really sets the stage for this whole idea of how we can improve and change our habits over time.
Yeah, and it's like those small little things you do day after day that can really add up to big results.
Exactly. Like atoms are the building blocks of everything around us. These tiny habits, atomic habits, are the foundation for massive change.
So, you've pulled some excerpts from the book for our deep dive
I
today.
have, yes.
And I think our mission today is to kind of pull out the most crucial and surprising takeaways that Clear has to offer.
Absolutely. We want to make sure we're focusing on what's going to be most valuable for our listeners. Those aha
Yeah,
moments.
it's those light bulb moments.
Exactly, and how they can apply these insights to their own lives to make meaningful changes, whether it's in their health, their productivity, or their relationships.
Right. And we're not going to like overwhelm you with every single detail of the book.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
We're going to distill it down to the core concepts,
Yeah, just the meat and potatoes.
the stuff that you can actually use.
Right.
And for our listeners who are all about learning efficiently and effectively, you're in for a treat because this book is packed with actionable advice.
And the foundation of it all is his habit loop, the 4 steps.
Cue craving response reward.
Right. And then the 4 laws of behavior change, which kind of build upon that.
Yeah, we'll break those down in a way that's super clear and easy to understand.
Awesome. So let's dive in. And I think the central idea is this concept of atomic habits, which you already mentioned.
Right, so just like atoms are these tiny particles that make up everything around us. Clara argues that our habits are these small actions that can ultimately lead to big results.
And it's not always obvious, right? It's like you don't see it happening day to day.
Exactly. It's like those tiny little 1% improvements that compound over time.
And he uses this really interesting example of British cycling.
Oh, yeah.
So they had been kind of a laughingstock in the world of cycling for like a century.
Right. They hadn't won a Tour de France in over 100 years, I think.
Yeah, and they had only won 1 Olympic gold medal since 1908.
Wow.
So they hired this guy, Dave Brailsford, to be their performance director, and he brought this idea of marginal gains.
Yeah, like looking for every tiny little area where they could improve by just 1%.
Exactly. It was like everything from the aerodynamics of their bikes to the type of pillows they were sleeping on.
Wow. So not just the physical training, but every aspect of their lives.
Right, it was hundreds of these tiny tweaks.
That's incredible.
And the results were unbelievable. Within 5 years, they were dominating at the Beijing Olympics.
Really?
Yeah, they took home something like 60% of the gold medals in track and road cycling.
That's insane.
I know. And then in the London Olympics, they just smashed it. Like they broke 9 Olympic records, 7 world records.
It's amazing how those tiny little changes can add up to such a massive difference.
Right. And it's not just about getting better. It's also about those small negative things that can compound over time.
Oh, yeah?
Like that daily stress, the negative self-talk, even like constantly being outraged by things you see online.
Right. It all adds up.
It's like that little bit of friction every day that you don't even notice, but it wears you down over time.
And that's why it's so important to be intentional about the habits we're building, because that same principle of compounding applies to both good and bad habits.
So if those tiny changes have such a big impact, where do we even start?
Well, Clear argues that we need to shift our focus from just setting goals to building systems.
Right, because it's not enough to just say, I want to achieve this.
Exactly. Goals are important, but they're just the starting point.
So what's the difference between goals and systems then?
Well, goals are about the results you want to achieve, whereas systems are about the processes that get you there.
So like a goal might be, I want to lose 10 pounds.
Right. And the system would be the specific actions you take to achieve that goal, like your workout plan, your meal plan, your sleep schedule.
And Clear points out that winners and losers often have the same goals.
Yeah, it's not just about having the goal, it's about having the right systems in place to actually make progress.
Right. It's like survivorship bias. We tend to only see the people who succeeded and assume it was because of their goals.
Exactly. But what about all the people who had the same goals but didn't have the systems to support them?
And that's where the real difference lies.
Exactly. And Clear makes this point really well. He says, the purpose of setting goals is to win the game. The purpose of building systems is to continue playing the game.
I love that because it's not about reaching a specific endpoint. It's about committing to that process of continuous improvement.
And if you're struggling to change your habits, it's usually not because you lack willpower. It's because you haven't built the right systems.
Right. It's like that famous quote, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's systems now. Clear also talks about identity-based habits.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
So he talks about these three levels of change: outcomes, processes, and identity.
So outcomes are the results you want, like losing weight, getting a promotion,
Right, processes are the actions you take to get there.
like going to the gym or working on a project,
And then identity is about your beliefs about yourself.
like I am a healthy person or I am a writer.
Right, and his argument is that for habits to stick, we need to focus on that level of identity.
Yeah, instead of starting with what you want to achieve, you start by asking yourself who you want to become.
Okay, so how does that actually work in practice?
Well, think about it. If your behavior is incongruent with your self-identity, it's not going to last.
So, like, if you want to be wealthy, but deep down you believe that wealthy people are greedy or corrupt.
You're probably going to sabotage your efforts subconsciously.
Right. Or if you want to be healthier, but you identify as someone who values comfort and convenience.
You're going to struggle to stick to those healthy habits.
He tells this great story about this guy, Brian Clark, who bit his nails his whole life.
Oh, yeah.
And he tried everything to stop, but nothing worked.
So what did he do?
So he decided to ask his wife to schedule him a professional manicure.
Interesting.
And by starting to identify as someone who gets manicures, it completely shifted his behavior.
That makes sense.
Because the act of biting his nails was so incongruent with that new identity.
Yeah, it's like every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to be.
And as those votes accumulate, they build up evidence for that new identity. So it's like a two-step process.
Yeah.
First, you decide who you want to be.
And then you start proving it to yourself with small, consistent actions.
So this brings us to the 4 laws of behavior change. And the first one is make it obvious.
All right, let's dive into that.
So to understand how these laws work, we need to revisit that habit loop.
Cue, craving, response, reward.
Right. The cue triggers the craving, which motivates the response, and then the reward reinforces the whole loop.
And the first law is all about making that cue as obvious as possible.
So how do we do that? Clear gives us some really practical strategies.
The first one is the habit scorecard, where you write down all your current habits, good and bad.
It's like becoming aware of what you're actually doing on autopilot.
Right, you can't change something if you're not even aware of it.
And then there's implementation intentions, which
Yeah.
is where you create a specific plan for when and where you'll perform a new habit.
Yeah, it's like the I will behavior at the time and location formula.
Right. The more specific you are, the more likely you are to actually follow through.
Exactly. So
Okay.
instead of saying I'll exercise more, you'd say I'll go for a run at 7 a.m. in the park.
And then there's habit stacking, which I love.
Oh yeah, habit stacking is great.
It's where you link a new habit to an existing habit.
So you're using something you already do consistently as a trigger for the new behavior.
Right. Clear uses this example of the French philosopher Diderot and the scarlet robe.
Oh, tell me about that.
So he gets this beautiful new robe, and suddenly all his other possessions look shabby in comparison.
Oh no.
So he ends up buying all this new stuff to match the robe.
I see.
And it's this idea that one purchase can lead to a cascade of other purchases.
I can definitely relate to that.
And habit stacking is kind of like the opposite of that.
Right. You're creating a positive cascade of habits.
Exactly. So instead of one bad habit leading to another,
You have one good habit leading to another.
and then there's the importance of designing your environment.
Yeah, make the cues for your good habits obvious and visible.
So if you want to read more, leave books lying around.
Right.
If you want to eat healthier, keep fruits and vegetables on the counter.
Make it easy to grab those healthy options.
Clear even shares this study about energy consumption in Dutch households.
Oh, tell me about that.
So some homes had their electricity meters in the basement where they weren't visible,
Oh.
and other homes had them in the hallway where they were in plain sight.
Interesting.
And the households with the visible meters use significantly less electricity.
Wow. So just by making their energy consumption more obvious,
Exactly.
that's really powerful.
And it also works the other way around, right? Like our context and environment become cues in themselves.
Absolutely. Like people tend to drink more in social settings because the whole environment is a trigger.
Right. Or you might eat more popcorn at the movie theater than you would at home.
Makes sense.
And then he talks about how seeking out new environments can help you break bad habits.
Yeah, like if you're trying to quit smoking, it might be helpful to avoid places where you used to smoke.
Right. Or if you're trying to lose weight, you might want to avoid going to restaurants that serve unhealthy food.
Yeah, a change of scenery can be really helpful.
Okay, so that's the first law. Make it obvious. Now let's move on to the second law. Make it attractive. So if the cue makes the habit obvious, it's the craving that makes it attractive.
And cravings are the driving force behind every habit. But it's not the habit itself we crave. It's the change in our internal state.
So we don't crave smoking a cigarette, we crave the feeling of relaxation or stress relief it provides.
Exactly. And that's why the second law is all about making the habit as attractive as possible.
And one of the ways Clear talks about doing that is through supernormal stimuli.
Supernormal stimuli. What's that?
So he uses this example of herring gull chicks pecking at exaggerated red dots on artificial beaks.
Okay.
And the researchers found that the bigger and redder the dot, the more frantically the chicks would peck,
Interesting.
even more so than at a real gull's beak.
So they were more attracted to the exaggerated stimulus.
Exactly. And he connects this to the modern food industry and this concept of the bliss point.
The bliss point, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's that perfect combination of salt, sugar, and fat that our brains find irresistible.
Right, like those processed foods that are engineered to be hyperpalatable.
Exactly. And it's like we've evolved to crave these things, but the modern food industry has taken it to a whole new level.
And that's why it's so hard to resist those unhealthy foods.
Right. But thankfully, Clear also gives us some strategies for making good habits more attractive.
Like what?
One is temptation bundling, which is basically linking something you want to do with something you need to do.
Oh, I like that.
So you only allow yourself to watch your favorite show while you're on the treadmill,
That's a good one.
or you only listen to your favorite podcast while you're doing chores.
Right, you're essentially making the need to do more enjoyable.
Exactly. And then there's the importance of joining a culture where your desired behavior is the norm.
Yeah, like if you want to get in shape, join a gym or a running club.
Right, because you're surrounded by people who are doing the same thing, and it makes it more appealing.
And it also provides a sense of accountability and support.
And then there's the power of reframing your habits.
Reframing, how do you mean?
So instead of thinking, I have to work out, you think, I get to move my body and feel energized.
Oh, I like that. Or instead of I have to cook dinner, it's I get to nourish myself with healthy food.
It's about changing your perspective
Exactly.
and finding the positive aspects of the habit.
And then Claire talks about creating a motivation ritual.
A motivation ritual, what's that?
It's basically a specific action you do before you engage in the habit.
Oh,
So like a musician might always do some stretches or vocal warm-ups before they start practicing.
I see.
And over time, that ritual becomes associated with the feeling of being in the zone.
So it helps them get in the right mindset.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered making it obvious and making it attractive.
Now let's move on to the third law, make it easy.
All right.
So this law is all about reducing friction and making the habit as effortless as possible to do,
And Clear introduces this concept called the law of least effort.
which basically says that we'll naturally gravitate towards the option that requires the least amount of work.
Makes sense.
So if you want to make a habit stick, you need to make it as easy as possible to do. Right, like if you want to start reading more, make sure you have a book readily available.
Or if you want to start meditating, have a designated spot in your home where you can sit quietly.
And Clear makes a distinction between being in motion and taking action,
Right, like planning to write an article versus actually writing it.
or researching healthy recipes versus actually cooking a healthy meal.
It's easy to get caught up in the planning stage.
Yeah, but ultimately it's the action that matters.
And mastery requires repetition, not perfection.
Yeah, just got to keep practicing.
And he introduces this concept called the habit line.
The habit line, tell me more about that.
So in the beginning, a new habit requires a lot of effort.
Right.
But as you keep practicing, it gradually moves below this habit line and becomes more automatic.
So it becomes easier to do over time.
Exactly. And it's all about frequency, not time.
So it's not about how long you've been doing something. It's about how many times you've done it.
Right. So what are some ways to make habits easier to do?
Well, one is to reduce friction.
Right. Make it as convenient as possible.
So if you want to draw more, keep your art supplies out and ready to go.
If you want to exercise, lay out your workout clothes the night before.
And you can also increase friction for bad habits.
Like unplugging the TV or hiding your phone.
Exactly. Make those bad habits less accessible.
And then there's the 2-minute rule.
Oh, I love the 2-minute rule.
Yeah, it's so simple but effective.
The idea is to scale down a new habit so that it takes less than 2 minutes to do.
Right. So instead of go for a run, it's put on your running shoes.
Or instead of write a chapter, it's open up my document.
And then once you've started, you're much more likely to keep going.
Yeah, it's like tricking your brain into taking action.
And then there's automation,
Yeah, technology can be a powerful tool for building good habits.
like setting up automatic savings transfers or using apps to track your progress.
But it's important to be mindful of the potential downsides of automation, too.
Right. You don't want to become too reliant on technology and lose the ability to do things manually,
And then there's commitment devices,
which are basically ways to lock yourself into good behavior.
like buying smaller portions of unhealthy food.
Or setting deadlines for yourself.
Or even giving your phone to a friend while you're working.
Right. It's about making it harder for yourself to give in to temptation.
Okay, so we've covered make it obvious, make it attractive, and make it easy.
Now we arrive at the fourth law. Make it satisfying.
This one is all about making sure the habit is rewarding.
And this is where things get tricky because our brains are wired to prioritize immediate gratification.
Right, we want the reward now, not later.
But a lot of good habits have delayed rewards,
Like saving for retirement or eating healthy.
while bad habits often have immediate rewards.
Like eating junk food or watching TV.
So Clear emphasizes the importance of finding ways to make good habits satisfying in the short term.
And one way to do that is to use reinforcement.
Right, like giving yourself a small reward after you complete a task.
But it's important to make sure the reward aligns with your identity.
So if you're trying to lose weight, don't reward yourself with pizza.
Right? Maybe reward yourself with a healthy meal you enjoy or a new workout outfit.
And then there's the importance of tracking your habits.
Yeah, measurement can be a really powerful motivator.
It's like seeing your progress visually.
And it helps you stay accountable.
Clear also has this rule, never miss twice.
Yeah, it's okay to slip up occasionally, but the key is to get back on track as soon as possible.
Don't let one missed workout turn into a week of missed workouts,
Exactly, and then there's the inversion of the fourth law.
which is basically making bad habits unsatisfying,
And one way to do that is to add a cost to the bad habit,
like having to pay a fine if you miss a deadline.
or having to do extra chores if you eat junk food.
And then there's the power of accountability.
Yeah, having someone to check in with you can make a big difference.
Clear talks about Margaret Cho's Song a Day challenge on social media.
Oh, yeah,
She was able to stick with it because she had all these people holding her accountable.
that makes sense.
And then there's the habit contract.
Which is basically a formal agreement with consequences for not following through.
Right, it's like putting your money where your mouth is.
So those are the 4 laws of behavior change.
But Clear also discusses some advanced tactics for optimizing your habits.
Like what?
One is the Goldilocks rule.
The Goldilocks rule, tell me more.
It's this idea that we experience peak motivation when working on tasks that are just the right level of difficulty.
Not too easy, not too hard.
Exactly. Clear says it should be about 4% beyond your current ability.
So it's challenging but not overwhelming,
Right, and this is often associated with that feeling of flow.
where you're completely absorbed in the task.
And he uses the example of Steve Martin's comedy career.
Oh yeah, he talks about how Martin spent years honing his craft before he achieved mainstream success.
It's a great example of the importance of long-term dedication and deliberate practice.
And Clear also warns against the danger of boredom and self-improvement.
It's easy to get restless and jump from one thing to another.
Yeah, but consistency is key.
And he talks about variable rewards as a way to keep things interesting.
Like introducing an element of surprise or unpredictability.
Right. And he says that the ideal balance is about 50-50 between success and failure.
So you need to challenge yourself enough to stay engaged, but not so much that you get discouraged.
And he makes this distinction between professionals and amateurs.
Oh yeah, the pros show up even when they don't feel like it,
They're committed to the process.
while amateurs let their emotions dictate their actions.
And another important concept is the potential downside of good habits.
A downside of good habits, how so?
Well, as habits become automatic, we can become less sensitive to feedback.
And fall into a state of mindless repetition.
Exactly. So it's important to periodically review your habits and make sure they're still serving you.
And that brings us to the importance of reflection and review.
Right. Clear talks about Pat Riley's career best effort program with the LA Laters.
Yeah, where they focused on making 1% improvements every day.
And then they would systematically review their performance.
It was all about continuous improvement.
And you mentioned you do an annual review.
I do. Yeah. I like to take some time at the end of each year to reflect on what worked, what didn't work, and what I learned.
I think that's so valuable.
It helps you stay on track and make adjustments as needed.
And finally, Clear talks about talent.
Ah, yes. The nature versus nurture debate.
And he emphasizes that while genes play a role, they don't determine our destiny.
Right. Competence is highly dependent on context and the habits we cultivate,
It's about finding the right habits for you.
and aligning your ambitions with your natural abilities.
He also talks about the explore-exploit trade-off.
Yeah, spending some time exploring different options before committing to one,
And he introduces this concept of winning by being different.
like finding your unique niche.
Exactly, and he uses the example of Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert.
Yeah, he was able to combine his skills in cartooning, joke writing, and business to create something truly unique.
And that kind of reminds me of your background in biomechanics.
Yeah, it's all about finding your own path.
So to sum it all up, the cardinal rule of behavior change is really those 4 laws. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying.
And when you're trying to break bad habits, just invert those laws.
Make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying.
Exactly. And remember that lasting change takes time and effort.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
So focus on building those small atomic habits day after day, and you'll eventually achieve your goals.
Awesome. So as we wrap up our deep dive into atomic habits, I have a question for you.
Okay, shoot.
What's one tiny, almost insignificant action you could take today that would be a vote for the kind of person you want to become?
That's a great question. Something small but meaningful.
Exactly, something atomic.
I encourage all our listeners to really think about that.
And remember, it's those small actions repeated over time that create real change.
So start building those atomic habits today.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.